The moment a janitor made all of America stop and look at itself. Have you ever witnessed a moment when an entire room suddenly fell silent? A moment when just one sentence, spoken by someone nobody ever pays attention to, had the power to turn around a multi-billion-dollar negotiation? That day in Los Angeles, people witnessed a scene the press would later call the awakening of a room full of power. And the person at the center of that moment wasn't a senator, wasn't a strategic advisor. It was Hannah Brooks, 28, a quiet housekeeping staff member who usually only appeared after everyone else had left. No one knew that just a few seconds later, one sentence from her would save a deal the U.S. delegation was on the verge of losing. And more importantly, it would force those who once looked down on her, and even those watching this video, to revisit a question as old as time, yet painfully true. Are we judging people far too quickly? Skyline Grand Hotel, the blue glass tower in the heart of Los Angeles, felt as if it was holding its breath that morning. Inside the luxurious conference room on the 34th floor, the negotiation between the United States delegation and the largest energy corporation in the Middle East was slipping out of everyone's control. One wrong sentence in the translation, just one, but it turned the phrase financial guarantee into full upfront payment. Chairman Kareem Al-Rafi, the man who carried the power of an entire oil empire, shot to his feet, his chair scraping sharply behind him, his expression darkening instantly. He spoke rapidly in Arabic, his voice low but heavy like falling stone. No one in the room understood the words, but everyone could feel it. He had just said something terrible. Richard Hale, head of the U.S. delegation, tried to remain calm, but the hand holding his pen had already begun to tremble. And the lead interpreter? His glasses slid down the bridge of his nose, his face drained of color, his lips moving without sound. Kareem turned away, striding toward the door. Each step felt like it marked another $1 million slipping away from America. The air thickened, almost suffocating. No one dared breathe too loudly because everyone knew if he walked out, this deal wouldn't just collapse. It would become an international embarrassment. Just a few more seconds, and the disaster everyone feared would unfold. And that was also the exact moment when the fate of this negotiation and of a young woman veered in a completely different direction. Just as the conference room door was about to close behind Kareem, a small voice, quiet yet clear enough to cut through the chaos, rose from the corner of the room. "Mr. Al-Rafi, you misunderstood." The sound made Kareem halt mid-step. As he turned around, the entire U.S. delegation turned with him, all of them stunned by the person who had spoken. Not an advisor, not a diplomatic aide. Not everyone was seated along the long row of well-dressed officials. It was Hannah Brooks, 28, a housekeeping staff member, still holding a floor mop with water dripping from its fibers. She straightened her posture, her brown hair neatly tied back, wearing a simple hotel uniform with no trace of makeup. A completely ordinary image in a room far too powerful. But her following sentence made the entire room nearly stop breathing. "No one meant to offend you. They were only trying to talk about ensuring long-term cooperation." Spoken in Arabic so flawlessly that no one could believe it. The interpreter stared, wide-eyed. The American negotiation team turned to stone. Richard gripped his folder so tightly the papers wrinkled under his fingers. And Kareem? He turned fully toward her, his gaze sharp as a blade, yet filled with curiosity. "You speak our language?" Hannah bowed her head slightly, neither arrogant nor timid. "I lived in Muscat for 8 years." The room fell so silent that one could hear a pin drop. No one knew how to react. A housekeeping employee, someone who had moved through the room all morning like a ghost, had just saved the dignity of an entire delegation. And the strangest part was, she spoke with a calmness almost impossible for anyone standing before a man as powerful as Kareem, as if she had been preparing for this moment all along. In reality, it was merely a single second of courage. Kareem folded his arms, eyes sharp but lowering, as if reassessing the entire person standing before him. And everyone else? They were all asking the same question. Who exactly is this girl? The silence in the conference room was no longer tense. It was confused. It was bruised pride. It was the inability to accept that a hotel janitor had just salvaged a negotiation that they, professionals, paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to ruin. Melissa Turner, the American advisor with a smile as sharp as a blade, was the one who finally shattered that silence. She tilted her head just enough for Hannah to hear, and just enough for the entire room to know. Who allowed her to speak in this meeting? What would a cleaning girl know about diplomacy? A colleague beside her chuckled. Yeah, maybe she's here to mop up our mistakes. The laughter spread, low, pointed, dripping with condescension. But Hannah did not turn around. She didn't react. She didn't flinch. She stood tall, eyes still on Kareem, as if the mockery behind her was nothing more than a passing breeze. That very composure made Melissa even more irritated. She raised her voice, loud enough for everyone to hear. Hey, do you think you're part of this meeting? Only then did Hannah turn. She looked at Melissa, not angry, not defiant, just a calm gaze, so steady that it became a pressure of its own. And in Arabic, light as a breeze but sharp as a blade, she said, "Intent matters more than what people rush to judge." Melissa froze. The entire room held its breath. No one was sure to whom that sentence was aimed, but everyone knew. Hannah had just held up a huge mirror for all of them. One of the American assistants instinctively straightened his collar. The interpreter adjusted his glasses as if to hide his embarrassment, and Richard could only bow his head with a long exhale. And the most interesting part? Kareem smiled. No one knew whether it was amusement or genuine respect. Perhaps both. Hannah didn't apologize. She didn't justify herself. She simply stood there, a janitor in a room full of power. But with her rare calm and clarity, she made sure they would never dare underestimate her again. Melissa's thin, mocking laugh hadn't even faded when the conference room door suddenly burst open. Stephen Price, the manager of the Skyline Grand Hotel, stormed in looking almost panicked. His tie was crooked, his face flushed red, his eyes searching for someone to unload his anger onto. And within seconds, those eyes found Hannah. He didn't need an explanation. He didn't need to understand what was happening. Stephen marched straight toward her, grabbing the sleeve of her uniform as if dragging someone who had committed a crime. "What are you doing in here?" The entire room jolted. Kareem's brow tightened. The interpreter looked away. Stephen continued, his voice sharp and cracking like a whip. "You clean rooms. You mop floors. This is a national-level negotiation room, not a place for you to interfere." Hannah remained still. She didn't resist. She didn't pull away. She simply looked at him with a calmness so steady it unsettled the entire room. Richard Hale tried to step in. "Stephen, But Stephen cut him off with a dismissive wave. "I don't care what she just did. She's violating protocol, and she will be held responsible." Each word seemed designed to crush Hannah's dignity in front of everyone. On the American side, a few people avoided her gaze. Melissa pressed her lips together, clearly satisfied with the scene. Hannah stayed silent. No protest, no plea, She spoke only one soft sentence, barely loud enough for Stephen to hear. "I understand." Then she bowed her head slightly toward Kareem and Richard, a graceful, quiet farewell, before Stephen dragged her out of the room. The mop she had been using still leaned against the wall, a silent witness to the injustice unfolding. And as the door closed behind her, Kareem stared at it for a long, unmoving moment, a gaze impossible to decipher. Anger? Amusement? Respect? All anyone knew was this: the room had lost Hannah, and instantly lost the calm she had brought with her. Hannah stepped out of the conference room in silence. The door behind her closed heavily, as if trying to swallow the entire incident whole. Stephen, after unloading every bit of his anger onto her, stormed off in frustration, leaving Hannah standing alone in the long carpeted hallway. The warm yellow ceiling lights reflected off her calm but slightly pale face, the kind of pallor that follows pressure, not fear. She stood still for a moment and straightened her slightly wrinkled uniform, not to look strong for anyone, but to remind herself, calmness is the one thing no one can take from me. When she walked into the kitchen area, the clattering of pots, the sharp rhythm of knives on cutting boards, and the thick smell of hot oil rushed toward her. A burly chef lifted a ladle big enough to be a weapon and laughed loudly. "Hey, the hotel's newest star is here!" More laughter erupted, cold, metallic, echoing off the stainless steel walls. Another cook chimed in. "What's next, Hannah? Leading the boardroom too?" Hannah paused. Her eyes didn't show sadness, didn't show anger, just a very human, very real exhaustion. A dirty dish towel landed near her feet. She bent down, picked it up, shook it gently, folded it, and placed it neatly onto the nearest cart. Then she spoke, her voice soft as a breeze, yet strong enough to fill the entire kitchen. "No job diminishes a person's worth. Only attitude can do that." The laughter died instantly. The chef's ladle lowered as if the weight he tried to throw at Hannah had bounced back onto him. Hannah continued walking, and this time, no one dared say another word. When she entered the main lobby, shimmering gowns, soft fur coats, and sparkling champagne glasses came into view. A group of guests chatting loudly stopped when they noticed her. A woman in a fur wrap tilted her head, voice dripping with mockery. "Isn't that the janitor who thinks she's some kind of diplomat?" Her friends burst into laughter. A man with a red tie swirled his champagne and slurred, "Stick to the mop, sweetheart. Go back to where you belong." Hannah took a few more steps, appearing as though she would let it pass, but then she stopped, not to confront them, but as if to leave behind something for them to think about. She turned her head, her eyes calm enough to silence the entire group without a single raised voice. "The mop is for cleaning floors," she said slowly. "But what cleans arrogance is time." No one responded. Even the clinking of glasses stopped. Hannah turned away, leaving behind faces flushed more from embarrassment than alcohol. She walked into the quiet hallway leading toward the hotel's side exit. No more voices, no more judging eyes. No one left to impress, defend against, or explain herself to. Just her, and the slow, steady rhythm of her own breathing. It was in that moment that Hannah's shoulders gently dropped. A small collapse the world would never see, but one every viewer could feel clearly. She placed a hand on her pocket, touching a small notebook, the place where she kept everything no one knew about her. Language notes, collected quotes, lessons she wrote for herself. The notebook reminded her, "Your true worth is determined by no one but you." Hannah drew a long, steady breath, letting the mockery dissolve from her chest, letting her calm return, letting her feet steady themselves again. And then she walked on. Not fast, not slow. Just the steady steps of someone who knows she has nothing to prove to anyone except herself. While Hannah was walking down the quiet hallway, another kind of chaos had begun to simmer inside the conference room. Ever since Hannah was dragged out, no one had been able to find the rhythm of the negotiation again. The lead interpreter, hands still trembling, tried to speak, but every word seemed to get stuck halfway up his throat. Richard Hale pressed his lips so tightly that his entire jaw locked, flipping through documents he couldn't actually focus on. Melissa sat with her arms crossed, lips curled in a half smirk, the kind of smirk worn by someone who thinks they've proven something. Yet even she couldn't understand why the room had suddenly gone so cold. And at the far end of the table, Kareem Al-Rafi was silent, motionless, but his eyes were anything but. He stared at the door Hannah had just exited as if something remained unfinished. Something everyone else, despite being some of the brightest minds in the U.S. delegation, had utterly failed to see. One of the American aides attempted to break the tension. "Mr. Al-Rafi, if we could return to the previous—" But before he could finish, Kareem lifted his hand. A small gesture, yet powerful enough to silence the entire room instantly. He looked straight at Richard, then at the interpreter, then at his own delegation. And then, with a voice deep and solid as carved stone, he said, "Bring her back." The entire room froze as if struck by a cold gust of wind. Every pair of glasses, every pen, every hand, all suspended midair. Richard blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. The interpreter dropped his pen. Melissa snapped her head up, eyes wide, unable to believe what she had just heard. But Kareem repeated himself, slower, clearer, leaving no room for doubt. "I want her to sit here. She will interpret." No one protested. No one dared. A Middle Eastern aide immediately left the room to search for Hannah. The door opened, then closed again, leaving behind a room full of people who suddenly didn't know what to say. The few exchanged glances, quiet, shameful, unspoken. They had underestimated the wrong person. In the hallway, hurried footsteps echoed. Hannah was halfway down the corridor when she saw the Middle Eastern aide approaching. He stopped in front of her, inhaling sharply like someone still unsure whether the words he was about to say were real. "Mr. Al-Rafi requests your return. Immediately." Hannah stood still for a few seconds, not in surprise, but in contemplation. She understood precisely what returning meant. To walk back into a room full of eyes that had mocked her, and to stand before a powerful man who had recognized her worth. Hannah nodded once, a slight nod, but steady, carrying the weight of a lifetime of being overlooked yet never allowing herself to shrink. When she stepped back into the conference room, every gaze locked onto her. There was surprise. There was discomfort. There was a hint of fear. And in some eyes, regret. Only Kareem Al-Rafi held the same calm gaze as before. He gestured to the empty chair beside him. "Please, sit." No theatrics, no flattery, no explanation. But for Hannah, and for everyone present, that simple invitation marked a moment when power changed direction. And the force that shifted the balance wasn't status or money or negotiation authority. It was actual competence, from someone they hadn't even bothered to look at. Hannah pulled out the chair, sat down, and opened her slightly worn notebook. She picked up her pen, and with a single steady breath before beginning to interpret each sentence with precision, completeness, and depth, she made the entire room understand one truth. When real value emerges, every prejudice collapses. The negotiation finally ended, in a rare, quiet harmony. No one in the room dared to say it out loud, but without Hannah, today's agreement would have dissolved like foam. As everyone gathered their documents, the glances directed at Hannah were hesitant, conflicted. Not everyone dared to say thank you, but the silence was no longer the cold disregard from earlier. It now carried respect, awkwardness, and a great deal of shame. Hannah stood, bowed politely to Kareem and the U.S. delegation. She didn't expect them to see her in a different light. She only wanted to leave the room with the same calm she had held throughout the entire meeting. But the moment she stepped into the lobby, Stephen was already waiting. His arms were crossed, the bridge of his nose flushed red from anger that had been building for far too long. The moment he saw Hannah, he strode forward and blocked her path. "What do you think you were doing in there?" Hannah didn't answer. She already knew what was coming. Stephen's voice rose, uncaring of who might be watching. "You embarrassed this hotel. A cleaning staff barging into a national-level meeting? Ridiculous!" The word ridiculous rang sharp enough to make several guests turn their heads. Richard, from a distance, tried to move toward them, but Stephen continued. "As of this moment, you no longer work here. I'll inform HR. Someone like you does not belong in this place." For a few seconds, everything seemed frozen in time. But Hannah simply smiled, a small, soft smile, tinged with a quiet sadness buried deep within. She reached to her chest and unpinned her name tag. Hannah Brooks. The small metal plate hit the marble counter with a light but cutting click, as if slicing through the weight she had been carrying for years. No argument, no pleading, just the ending of a chapter. She had lived with all the dignity she had. Hannah bowed to the receptionist, then walked away. Her slender figure looked fragile, but every step was steady, even though her heart trembled just a little. She pushed open the hotel doors. The late afternoon Los Angeles sunlight washed over her face. No one knew that in that very moment, her entire fate had already begun to shift. That evening, when the lobby had emptied, a thick envelope sealed with golden wax arrived. The night clerk noticed the writing. "For Miss Hannah Brooks, urgent." Stephen snatched the envelope as if expecting an apology addressed to him. He tore it open with a scoff, but within 1 second, the smirk vanished. His eyes widened, his flushed face turned pale. Inside was a short, sharply worded message. "I wish to meet her privately. Send Hannah to my penthouse. Kareem Al-Rafi." Stephen clenched the paper so tightly that the edges crumpled. Without a word, he stormed into his office, the door slamming behind him like thunder. On the highest floor of the Skyline Grand, Hannah stood before the massive penthouse doors, hands lightly clasped. No one had summoned her to reprimand her. No one had called her up to humiliate her. She had been called up for one reason. Her actual value had finally been seen. And as the doors slowly opened, Hannah had no idea that this meeting would take her life onto a path even those in the negotiation room earlier that day had not considered, could never dream of reaching. The penthouse level was almost perfectly soundproof. When the heavy door opened, Hannah stepped into a space so quiet she could hear her own breathing. The ceiling stretched high above her, and the floor-to-ceiling glass revealed a sweeping view of Los Angeles as the nightlights slowly came to life. Far below, Wilshire Boulevard glowed, the stream of cars flowing like a river of light. At the center of the room, Kareem Al-Rafi sat behind a black glass desk that reflected the last orange traces of sunset. No entourage, no secretary, no security team. Just him, and a small wooden box placed directly in front of him. Hannah stayed near the door, keeping the respectful and cautious distance her instincts told her to maintain. She bowed her head slightly. "You wished to see me?" Kareem didn't answer immediately. He observed her the way a person studies something rare, something that neither wealth nor power can command, something simply found. Then he gestured. "Please, sit." His voice wasn't loud, but it was full, steady, unshakable. Hannah approached and sat across from him, back straight, hands resting lightly on her lap, calm in a way that made others adjust their posture without realizing it. Kareem placed his hand on the wooden box and gently pushed it toward her. "Open it." Hannah hesitated, briefly, then obeyed. Inside was an envelope embossed with the national seal of the United Arab Emirates. She touched its edge, feeling the thickness of the paper, the kind reserved for high-level diplomatic correspondence. As she opened it, her heartbeat shifted, not from fear, but from the unmistakable sense that her life was about to change direction. She slid the letter out, a few sharp, crisp lines. "Dear Miss Hannah Brooks, we respectfully invite you to join the Language Council at the North American Energy Summit, Houston." Hannah read it twice, as if her mind needed a few seconds to catch up to the pace of her racing heart. A hotel cleaning staff, invited as a regional language advisor? Kareem saw her confusion and allowed himself the faintest, rarest smile, the same one she had glimpsed in the conference room. "You didn't simply translate my words," he said slowly, every syllable deliberate. "You understood them. And you understood what the Americans were trying to hide behind their panic." Hannah held the edge of the letter, her fingers trembling, not from fear, but from emotion she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Kareem continued. "People who have stood beside me for years don't have that ability. You possess something no school can teach. Subtlety." The door behind them opened quietly. Kareem's aide, the same man who had mocked Hannah earlier, stepped in. His eyes were still sharp, but now held a flicker of discomfort at seeing her here. He muttered bitterly in Arabic, "Don't think this is anything special. Luck doesn't last long." Kareem didn't turn, but the slight raise of his eyebrow was warning enough. Hannah stayed composed, looking directly at the man. "Luck can't replace effort," she replied in flawless Arabic. "And effort needs no permission." The aide's face flushed red. He stepped back, saying nothing more. Kareem inhaled slowly, the way a man does when he is sure of his decision. "If you agree," he said, "we begin in Houston. If you refuse," he paused, "then this world will lose someone it very much needs." For the first time that day, Hannah bowed her head, and her eyes shimmered. Not from humiliation, not from hurt, but because after all the mockery, the disdain, and the public shaming, someone finally saw her, truly saw her. She folded the letter, placed it back on the desk, and spoke in a small but steady voice. "I accept." And on the highest floor of the Skyline Grand, a new chapter opened. Quiet, gentle, but as powerful as the first desert wind rising across the dunes. Houston, a vast conference hall filled with silver microphones glittering under rows of white lights. Hundreds of journalists, energy executives, politicians, seasoned diplomats, all waiting for something to happen. And they watched Hannah Brooks walk in, still in a simple black dress, her brown hair tied back just like any ordinary day. No dramatic makeover, no glamorous transformation, no appearance of someone who had made it. And perhaps it was precisely that simplicity that left people unsettled. A female reporter, bright red lipstick, oversized camera on her shoulder, rushed forward the moment Hannah set her notebook on the table. "You're the cleaning staff from LA, right? Do you think you're being excessively lucky right now?" The whole room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for Hannah's reaction. But she simply smiled, a quiet smile that made the reporter's sarcasm feel suddenly small. "Luck doesn't speak multiple languages," Hannah replied. "Hard work does." A ripple of silence spread. Then a few nods, a few smiles. Hannah sat, opened the notebook that had followed her through years of struggle, and began interpreting. Her voice was low, steady, each linguistic structure delivered with such clarity that everyone forgot she'd been holding a mop just weeks earlier. New York, the OPEC summit. This was where the actual value of any language expert was put to the test. Delegates from numerous nations sat in a wide circle, microphones ready, cameras poised. No one thought of belittling her anymore, but they still doubted. Not out of malice, but because it was hard to believe an unknown girl could stand in a place like this. Hannah knew it. She began by speaking in classical Arabic, a dialect so intricate that even many young native speakers struggle with it. Her voice was soft as silk, yet carried the sound of a bronze bell, and the enormous hall fell utterly silent. A silver-haired professor in the observers' row stood and applauded first. "I have never heard an American speak this way. Not once in my 40 years of linguistics." The applause spread, slowly, steadily. The next day, Reuters ran a headline, "Kareem Al-Rafi invests $2 billion in the U.S., guided by linguistic advisor Hannah Brooks." Those who had mocked her, the hotel chefs, the wealthy guests, Melissa, Stephen, now reappeared on social media differently. Stephen was quietly fired. Melissa lost a significant contract. Richard's negotiation team faced an internal investigation. No one mentioned Hannah's name in those downfalls. But the truth was louder than any public statement. As for Hannah, she never returned to the Skyline Grand. She walked down Fifth Avenue on a late autumn evening, the New York wind brushing through her neatly tied hair. In her hand was the same old notebook, the one that had carried her through contempt, humiliation, clarity, and finally, recognition. She sat on a bench, opened to the last page, and wrote a line that would later be quoted across diplomatic circles. "True worth does not need to be granted by others. It shines on its own, when you dare to stand tall in the dark." She closed the notebook. She smiled. The depth in that smile was the quiet sum of everything she had overcome. In this world, some people must endure countless doors slamming in their faces before they finally find the one door meant for them. Hannah Brooks was one of them. And when that door opened, she stepped through with a calm so powerful, it silenced the world. If this story touched you, leave a small sign to let us know you are still walking with these silent but extraordinary lives. A like, a comment, or a share with someone who needs hope. Sometimes that is the door you open for them. You are watching Deep Life Tales, where the smallest stories move the heart more than the grandest events ever could. See you on the next journey.